This is another personal story from the 1939 first edition of Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. This short story is entitled Lone Endeavor, and it is written by Pat Cooper from California. As a mother looked idly through a small medical journal, an article written by a doctor on alcoholism caught her attention. Anything in reference to this subject was worthy of perusal, for her son, an only child, had been drinking uncontrollably for years. Each year of his drinking had added new heartaches, though every small ray of hope had been investigated, and though he had tried desperately to stop. But little had been accomplished. He was occasionally able to remain sober for short periods of time, but things became worse. So his mother read the short medical article of a heavy heart, where she was constantly on the alert to find something which might prove helpful to her son. The article gave her only a vague hint of the solution found by many alcoholics, which is fully covered in this book. But the mother immediately wrote to the doctor explaining her heartbreaking problem and requesting further information. She felt there must be some help somewhere, and surely, if other men had recovered from alcoholism, her son also had a chance. The doctor turned her letter over to Alcoholics Anonymous. It ended as follows: God knows, if you can help my son, it will bring happiness to many of us who love him and ache with him in his futile effort to overcome his problem. Please accept my gratitude for whatever you may be able to do, and let me hear from you. A few days later, the following letter was sent to his mother. It was our initial effort to help others through the book alone. About 100 men here in the East have found a solution for alcoholism that really works. We're now preparing a book hoping to help others who suffer in the same way, and are enclosing a rough copy of the first two chapters. As soon as possible, we'll forward a rough copy of the rest of the proposed book. We received no answer for some time and later wrote again. We're sending you a pre-publication copy of Alcoholics Anonymous. We would appreciate hearing about your son's condition and his reaction to this volume, as this is the first time we've had an opportunity of trying to help an alcoholic at long distance. Won't you please write us? Sincerely, Alcoholics Anonymous. After another period of silence from the far west, during which time we began to think this book was inadequate without personal contact, we received a long letter from the son himself, a letter which we feel will be tremendous help to others who live in distant places, who feel alone and totally unable to work this program out by themselves. A letter which encompasses a man's solitary effort to take what we had to offer and carry the program through alone except for one book and the help which printed pages could give, alone until he tried our program of recovery and found spiritual help, spiritual comfort and help. This is the letter he wrote as follows: I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your letters and for Alcoholics Anonymous. I've read this book from cover to cover, and it's really the first time I have read anything dealing with alcoholism that made sense and showing understanding of the problems of the alcoholic. I found the personal stories very accurate as pertaining to my own experience. Any one of them might have been my own story. I started drinking in 1917 when I was 18. I enlisted in the Army, soon became a non-commissioned officer, went overseas as a sergeant. I associated with older men, drank, gambled, and ran around with them, sampling everything France had to offer. Upon my return from France, I continued drinking. At that time, I could get plenty tight at night, get up in the morning, and go to work feeling okay. The following 15 years were one drunk after another, which, of course, as they got worse, meant one job after another. Police department, truck driving, etc. Then, in an attempt to get away from it all, I enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. In 13 months' time, I drank very little and was promoted to gunnery sergeant, a rank that usually takes 10 or 12 years to obtain, if ever. I started drinking again. In 6 months, I was reduced to line sergeant. I transferred to get away from my former associates. Then came several years in China. China, of all places for a man who wanted to stay away from booze. My 4 years over, I did not. My 4 years over, I did not re-enlist. Came more jobs selling automobiles, real estate, etc. Then down to odd jobs. I was drinking so much no one could take a chance by giving me a steady job, such as I could easily have handled if I had left the liquor alone. I married, and the booze split that up. My mother was a nervous wreck. I was getting arrested for drinking 3 or 4 times a year. I had myself committed on 2 different occasions to state hospitals, but soon after discharge, I was back at it again. 2 years ago, I went to a private hospital for a liquor cure. A week after getting out, I was curious as to what would happen if I took a drink. I took it, nothing happened. I took another, why go further? I went back to the private hospital, came out, and was okay for a few months, then at it again. Now, previous to this and at the time of these cures, I was working at a state hospital for the insane. I saw continually the effects of liquor. But did it help me leave it alone? No, it did not. But it did make me realize that if I did not, I would end up in the bug house and someone else would be carrying the keys. After several years of working at mental institutions, always in a violent ward on account of my 6 feet 2 inches and 210 pounds, I realized there was too much nervous tension, and every couple of months I would blow up and be off drunk for a week or 10 days. I left mental work and got a job at the County General Hospital, where I'm now in a medical ward. We get quite a few patients with DTs, all broken out with wine sores, etc. I steadied down a bit, but not enough. I was off sick for several days, every 6 or 8 weeks. I married again, a good Catholic girl whose people were used to having liquor, especially wine, around the house always. She, of course, could not understand my drinking. As far as that's concerned, neither could I. And all this time, my poor mother and wife became more and more worried. Mother had heard of your wonderful work and wrote a doctor. You answered with letters and finally the book. Before the book arrived and after reading the chapters, I knew that the only way to combat this curse was to ask the help of that greater power, God. I realized that even though I was then on a binge, I contacted a friend of mine who was a liaison officer of the disabled veterans in World War. He made arrangements for my care in a state sanitarium which specialized in alcoholism. I wanted to get the liquor out of my system and start this new idea right. I explained my absence as flu, and under the care of the head psychiatrist, spent most of the time from September 1, 1938 till January 15, 1939 at the hospital, having my appendix removed and a ventral hernia fixed up. 6 weeks ago, I returned from the sanitarium and your book was here waiting for me. I read. More than that, I pored over it so as not to miss anything. I thought to myself, yes, this is the only way. God is my only chance. I prayed before, but I guess not the right way. I followed out the suggestions in the book. I'm happier this moment than I've ever been in years. I'm sure I've found the solution, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had talks with another man, an attorney, who was at the sanitarium when I was. He has my book now, and he is very much enthused. I go down to the sanitarium every week for a checkup and medicine, which they gave me, just the tonic, no sedatives. The managers asked me to contact some of his patients along our line. How I told him I would appreciate his letting me do so. Would you put me in touch with some AAs out here? I know it would help me and help me help others. I hope you can make sense of this letter. I could write so much more, but this I've written just as it popped into my head. Please let me hear from you. This man's lone struggle was impressive. Wouldn't the story of his solitary recovery be helpful to many others who would have to start out by themselves with only this book to aid them? So we immediately sent him a wire. It says, just received a letter. May we have your permission to use this letter anonymously in book at as first example of what might be accomplished without personal contact. Important you wire this permission as book is going to printer. Alcoholics Anonymous. His wire arrived the next day. Permission granted with pleasure, lots of luck. Please join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for Alcoholics Anonymous and the Big Book. Amen.